Hello and welcome again to Penthesilea On Air podcast. Today with my amazing guest, Dr. Molly Gebrian, professional violist, neuroscientist, and one of today's leading voices in translating the science of learning and memory into practical tools for musicians. Molly holds degrees in both music and neuroscience from Oberlin College and Conservatory, the New England Conservatory, and Rice University. After a decade of teaching viola at the collegiate level, including positions at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and the University of Arizona, she joined the faculty of the New England Conservatory, where she teaches the science of practicing. Her research and teaching center on how musicians can learn more efficiently, perform with greater confidence, and understand what's happening in the brain during practice, performance, stress, and recovery. She presents internationally at music festivals, universities, and conferences, and her book, Learn Faster, Perform Better, A Musician's Guide to the Neuroscience of Practicing, published by Oxford University Press, has already become a key resource for musicians and educators. In this podcast, we dive into the science behind 4-week audition preparation, optimal practice design, memory formation, mental rehearsal, habit change, and how to balance structure with intuition. We explore what really happens during moments like stage blackouts, how to rebuild trust in your memory, and how musicians can retrain their brains after traumatic performance experiences. If you're ready to understand your musical mind, rethink how you practice, and transform your relationship with learning and performing, you're in exactly the right place here. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for exclusive bonus material with extra questions from our Academy's community, answered by our expert. A very warm welcome to all those classical musicians out there who want to grow and expand a creative lifestyle both on and off stage. My name is Karin Bonelli. I'm flutist at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, a passionate explorer and seeker in musical and personal growth, and founder of Penthesilea Academy, the most innovative masterclass designed for audition preparation. This podcast is for you if you're searching for new ideas to elevate the productivity of your musical practice and your level of focus and expression on stage. But that's not all. In each episode, you will find bits and pieces to integrate into your everyday life, as well as new perspectives and insights by our experienced and passionate team and guests. Music is not a job. It is a way of living. My name is Karin Bonelli, and this is Penthesilea On Air. Hi, Molly, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Molly, your book came to me at the exact right timing. I had a newborn, so I had no sleep, and I had very short practice sessions, and I had to learn a contemporary piece, and I tried to cram everything into those little practice hours. And then one of our coaches of the Academy told me about your book, and that just changed everything. Like, I became so much more efficient, and it made so much more fun to just practice in this short hours. Thank you for writing this book. It's just amazing, also for our students. And for our listeners who haven't read it yet, what I also believe to be so valuable is that it's not just some guru giving great advice and you believe it or you don't, but every statement is proven by a scientific experiment, which speaks so clear to like our neocortex, right? And thus makes things so much more convincing and worth trying out. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm so glad the book was helpful to you and other people.
Yeah. It was. Molly, I'd love to jump right in and start with a really practical example here, something most musicians can relate to. So let's imagine someone has a major audition coming up in 4 weeks,
Mhm.
and some of the excerpts are familiar and some are new. And maybe there are like 30 excerpts and two concertos. And of course, this is transferable to any kind of
Anything.
performance. If someone came to you with that situation, how would you design an ideal neuroscience informed practice plan for those
Yeah.
4 weeks?
Yeah, great question. This is something I get asked a lot, like for real, from actual people.
I can't
So
imagine.
yeah, the first thing I always advise people to do is to break down the excerpt list into red, yellow, and green excerpts. I talk about this in my book in terms of sections of pieces, but you can also do it with excerpts. So your red excerpts are the new ones, and any that are like really hard and emergencies. And if you had to perform them right now, it would be an absolute disaster. So figure out what your red excerpts are. The yellow excerpts need work, but they're not red. And usually that distinction is pretty clear to people, what the emergencies are and what is not an emergency but needs work. And then the green excerpts are things that feel fine. Like obviously you're going to practice, obviously you're going to prepare, but if you had to play them right now, you wouldn't completely embarrass yourself, just to give you yourself like a hierarchy of what to start with and where to start. Because especially with a big excerpt list, it can be very overwhelming and, it can be hard to know where to jump in. So I find that dividing the excerpts into that and dividing the sections of the concertos into red, yellow, and green too is really helpful. So it's probably not the whole concerto that's an emergency, right? There's like specific places that because you've played it many times. So that's the first thing to do. And then in terms of how to prepare, one of the most counterintuitive things about how we learn is that breaks are really beneficial, and that we make a lot of progress during breaks because our brains continue to process and continue to do things during a break. And so actually, if there's any way to start preparing more than a month before so you can take longer breaks, that is ideal, actually. And I know that that's often not possible because you don't get the excerpt list from the orchestra, right, soon enough before. That being said, there are standard excerpts, right, that we all practice for years and years and years. So if you are, on the audition circuit, let's say, giving yourself more time, so you're preparing for a while and then you take time off on purpose to allow your brain to process and then come back, that's going to be better than cramming it all in. But it's often not possible. So to get back to we have 1 month to prepare for this audition.
Yeah.
So now you have your red, yellow, green excerpts. With the green ones, you definitely do not want to do them every day. You don't need to do them every day because they're green, and you're going to get more benefit if you don't do them every day. So when I talk to musicians about this, I talk to them about crafting some sort of schedule where the green excerpts are done maybe once or twice a week, not every day, because you're going to get benefit from taking the days off. The yellow excerpts you want to do more often, but still not every day, maybe like every other day or something like that. And then the red excerpts, especially the ones that are brand new that you've never practiced before, yes, you want to be practicing those every day. You want to be very targeted in what you're working on. Even if it's a brand new excerpt, there's probably parts of that are easier than others, right? And so start with the most challenging aspect of that excerpt. And ideally, the red excerpts, at some point, you take a day off from them at some point in the process, because that, again, is going to benefit your learning. As you get closer to the audition, you need to be doing mock auditions. And I feel like everybody sort of knows this, that is doing audition prep. I always advise people to start doing mock auditions at least 2 weeks before if they can. That being said, if excerpts aren't really ready yet, then that might be more detrimental than it is helpful to start doing mock auditions 2 weeks before. So maybe your red excerpts, you only include them like a week before in your mock auditions if they don't really feel like, it would be an absolute disaster to try to perform them. But you can start doing mocks with your yellow and green ones, for instance. And then you do as many mock auditions as you can. In front of people is great if you can, but if you can't do them in front of people, in front of your own video camera, right? So that you watch back and take notes. But the thing I think a lot of people miss in audition prep is this idea of taking breaks.
Yeah.
Because it's
Can
really
you
counterintuitive.
maybe tell us what happens in our brains when we take those breaks. Why is it that we actually learn in the breaks and not while we're in the practice
In the
room
practice
active?
room, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a study I talk about a lot looking at micro breaks. We'll start with small breaks, then we'll go to bigger breaks. So there's a study I talk about a lot looking at micro breaks, which are like 10 to 15-second little breaks during your practice session. And in this study, they had people practice something for a short amount of time, then take a micro break, then practice, micro break, practice, micro break. And when they analyzed the data, they found that the vast majority of the improvement was attributable to the breaks. They also had people hooked up to a brain scanner while they were doing this practice and then take a little break. And they found that during those micro breaks, people's brains were doing a super fast forward replay of what they had just practiced. The brain was continuing to practice what they'd just done 20 times faster, which is just the coolest thing ever. And so the
Wow.
brain was doing a lot of processing during those breaks. And there's a graph in the study where you can see that every time people came back to practice again after this little break, they were at a higher level than before the break. And that's because the brain is continuing to process. So short little breaks like this during a practice session give you a lot of benefit because your brain continues to work on it in a way that's much more efficient than actually doing it on the instrument yourself. So that's small breaks. Our brains continue to process. During longer breaks, our brains actually make physical changes to itself. So in order to learn anything, the brain has to make physical changes to support a higher level of learning. An analogy that I use for this, it's actually not in my book, is that of strength training. Because I think a lot of people have at least a passing knowledge of this. With strength training, you don't actually get stronger in the workout itself. You create micro tears in your muscles, and then your body repairs the muscle stronger on your rest day. And then when you come back, you're stronger, right? And so even if you've never done strength training, I think people know like you can't work out intensively every single day without a break. Like that's never going to work. Your body's going to be too tired because it has to do that repair. Our brains are the same. You're not creating micro tears in your brain, obviously, when you're practicing, but you're giving the brain input just like you give the muscles input. And then on those rest days, your brain does the physical reconstruction it needs to, just like with your muscles. And then you come back stronger. Or you come back with a higher level of skill. And I think everybody's had this experience kind of by accident. Like you have to take time off because you got sick or you got injured or like you were traveling and you couldn't practice or something like that. And you come back and it feels a lot better than it seems like it should because you didn't practice for a couple of days. I think everyone's had that experience and it feels like, whoa, like that's nice that happened. It feels like a fluke and it doesn't feel like something you can like count on. But actually, you should count on it and you should schedule your practicing to take advantage of that.
Wow, that's amazing to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah, I often hear students like, "Oh my God, that is so unfair, and I couldn't practice for 1 week, and now I'm better. Why
right,
am I practicing at all?" So,
right.
and what about the longer breaks? Like, okay, these are micro breaks
Mhm.
and like a day off or so, but
Right.
maybe during a stretch of a year, is there
Yeah.
also a recommendation how many breaks, real longer breaks, we should take?
Right. Yeah. Great question. So, in this research on taking breaks, there's something called the forgetting curve, which basically says that the better you get at something, the longer you want your breaks to be. Because when you take longer breaks, your brain has an opportunity to forget a little bit. And it seems like that would be a bad idea to forget. But when you almost forget something, but not quite, and remind yourself, it helps it stick better in your brain than if you didn't allow your brain to forget. I know it's very, very counterintuitive. And
Yeah.
when something is brand new, you forget it right away. So, my example for this is like going to a party or something, meeting a new person. They say, "Hi, my name is so and so." And then the minute they walk away, you're like, "Oh my God, I don't remember their name." Right. Because you
Yeah.
just learned it. You were paying attention, but like not really. And you instantly forgot it. But if it's somebody you've known for a really long time, it's going to take a long time before you forget their name, right? So the newer something is, the quicker you're going to forget it. The more you've learned something, the more you've been playing something, the longer it's going to take for you to forget it. And you want to give your brain an opportunity to forget. I think musicians have also had this experience of like working on some piece of standard rep or something and then putting it down for many months or many years potentially. And then you come back to it, and at first it feels a little bit rusty, maybe, but really quickly it gets back to feeling really good. And it feels way better than it did before. And it feels, especially when you get on stage, it feels much more solid and like, oh, yeah, this is totally no big deal as compared to like the first time you played it. And that's
Yeah.
beyond what you would expect, like just getting better at your instrument. It really feels like a function of time, and it is a function of time because of how the brain works.
Yeah, so interesting. And
Yeah.
speaking of timing, we had an amazing interview also with Dr. Altenmüller, and he talked about that the time of day is also very important when we practice which aspect or which skill. And he told us that in the morning, 1 hour after waking up, your auditive channel is at the optimum. So
Hmm.
it's great to start practicing like 1 hour after you get up. And in your book, also, I read on memorization that there is a perfect timing for some skills to be trained. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I talk about in my book is that there's some research. Some of it is mixed. Some of it doesn't really show an effect, but there's some research that shows that, like, especially for things like that part that you just cannot remember for the life of you, that if you practice it like last thing in the day and then first thing the next morning before you practice anything else. And this is not literally like you have to practice it and then jump straight into bed and then the next morning like you get up and you like practice right away. But like the last thing you practice and don't practice anything else, and then the first thing the next morning, there seems to be a benefit to that. There's a lot of benefits of sleep sort of in general, that if you do something day one, you get a full night's sleep, you're going to get a boost in your ability to do it on day two because of the sleep. But there is some evidence that suggests that, like, yeah, last thing you practice in the day, first thing you practice the next day before practicing anything else, you'll get a boost from that.
Yeah, that's great information
It
too.
is. And you can use it
Yeah.
strategically, right? Like I use that
Yeah.
strategically for like that one part that's like, oh gosh, I always forget how this goes. Like you know, use that information really strategically. That's the last thing you're going to practice, and then you're going to practice it first the next day.
Yeah, amazing. And then there's this big question always by students and professors. What's the perfect amount of time we should be practicing in a day? Because
Yeah,
there are very
exactly.
different points of view here.
Exactly. Yeah. So, a couple things about this with scheduling practice in a day. It seems like the limit for what humans can deal with in a day is 5 hours of practice, that we can't really practice with the focus that we need to actually get something out of our time for more than 5 hours a day. So, anybody that's practicing like 6, 7, 8 hours, a lot of that is not efficient practice. You're much better off doing other things. And like we were talking about, if you're practicing that much, you're not taking breaks, and you're going to make more progress if you take the breaks. So that's within a day. And then the ideal amount of time, like at once before you take a break within the day, seems to be after every 25 to 30 minutes of practice, you want to take at least a 5 minute break. And then after an hour to an hour and a half at the very most, obviously with breaks every half an hour, you want to take a longer break, like an hour and a half to a 2 hour break. And this aligns with the 25 to 30 minute thing. People are often like, oh, that sounds like the Pomodoro technique. It's like, yes, that's exactly what it is. So it
Yeah.
aligns with what we know our brains like for learning, but it also aligns with what doctors who study musicians' injuries have found is most beneficial for protecting our bodies. So it's nice
Mhm.
that you get, you know, those two benefits. And those, I always say those are outer bounds. Like you could definitely take a break before 25 or 30 minutes. You can definitely take a break that's longer than 5 minutes, but that's sort of the outer bounds of what you want to do.
Yeah, great. So also in our example, 4 weeks, it doesn't make sense to like cram everything in 2 weeks and then do like 8 hours a day.
No, it doesn't.
No.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't do, because you're going to exhaust yourself. You're going to potentially injure yourself. You're
Yeah.
not going to get the benefit of those breaks, and you're probably going to stress yourself out. And it's not good to go into any kind of performance audition feeling really stressed and anxious, because then you're not going to play well.
Yeah, that was also a question I was going to ask. That if you have that stress and that pressure, you have to learn this program,
Yeah,
then in the practice room, you already feel the tension rising. Is
exactly.
there a detrimental effect of that? But you already like answered it.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, if only that you're going to be tighter in your body. And it's hard to play when you're really tight. It's hard to sound good. It's hard to be musical and expressive when you're really tight and anxious. But also, your focus is going to be in a really strange place, right? If you're really anxious, you're usually going to be more focused on like perfectionism and, you know, getting every single little detail right. And that kind of paradoxically will make it so the details aren't as good as if you're thinking sort of more big picture about what are you trying to express, the phrasing, the shaping, the sound, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, great. And you often say that each practice session should have a clear goal in the
Mm-hmm.
book. In this kind of 4 week preparation, how would you suggest balancing like daily short term goals and longer weekly or monthly goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'm somebody who likes to do things on paper and actually like see things. So I
Me
like
too.
to have like an actual physical calendar that I can see. And I often advocate that people make a backwards calendar. So your audition is this day, January 31st, and you're starting on January 1st, let's say. And then working backwards from there, like what are your goals along the way to this is the audition day? What do you need to do to get there? So, like, when are you going to do your mock auditions? When's the first mock audition going to be? When are you going to play some excerpts for someone not in a mock audition, but you're going to play them for someone for the first time just to get some feedback or something? And so think about like, what are the milestones you want to have for yourself along the way and put them in backwards in your calendar so you can see sort of what you have to do. And I find that that really helps people with the sort of more long-term planning of what do I need to do this week? What do I need to do over these 2 weeks? And then once you have those big term plans, that can help you figure out in your day to day, okay, what do I need to tackle today to be ready for this milestone that's coming up at the end of this week, whatever you've decided. I find it really helpful in my practice journal at the end of each day to write down what needs work, either things I didn't get to that day because I ran out of time, or things that I noticed that day that I didn't realize were an issue, or maybe I recorded a few excerpts and I'm going to listen through and I'm going to jot down notes. And so I find it really helpful to write down at the end of my practice session what needs attention. And then either then at the end of the day to make a plan for the next day, or certainly before I start my practice the next day to make a plan based on my long-term goals and what I have written down, like, okay, what do I need to accomplish today? What are my goals for this practice session in front of me, or my goals for like today as a whole day?
Yeah. Yeah. But I also have some colleagues that are like, yeah, I know, but structure is not my thing. I'm just such an intuitive learner. What would you say to those? Are they right? Is it a good idea to just go with the flow, or should we really like keep the structure?
I think both have value. I think that it is important to pay attention to your intuition, because I think as musicians, we do have powerful intuitions and we have to be able to rely on those on stage, right? And so I do think it's helpful to rely on your intuition, but I think that if you're relying solely on that and you don't have a plan, then it's really easy to have something fall through the cracks or get yourself in a situation where suddenly you're like, oh no, like I forgot about this thing. And you're like cramming something all of a sudden. And so
Yeah.
I think both are useful. I think you can go too far on the, oh, I'm not going to plan anything. Everything's going to be left up to intuition side. I think you can also go too far on the, I'm going to plan everything down to a T side, because you have to be able to adjust to changing conditions in the moment, right? So I think it's about finding balance. And I think I know that I am someone who tends to fall too far on the side of planning things. And so I am always very mindful of, okay, I'm going to make a plan, but I have to be open to, adjusting based on my intuition of what needs to happen. I think people who fall on the side of, oh, I leave everything to intuition and I never plan, I think it's helpful to look at that and be like, does that always serve you as well as it could? Is there a possibility for some planning in there? And it's not saying I'm never going to rely on my intuition. It's just, yeah, finding that balance.
Yeah, great. And I want to come back to this example before where we talked about when stress creeps in the
Yeah.
practice room. Do you have like a reset button then, or something you do, some kind of exercise for refocusing and getting getting away
Getting
from
that.
the adrenaline?
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, the thing that seems to help people the most, two things actually. One is the micro breaks. I have been hearing from people more and more as people read my book or, hear me talk about these micro breaks, that the micro breaks in and of themselves are really helping people stay calm, lessen the anxiety, lessen the frustration in the practice room, that it's just a moment of stop, and do nothing. And so those in and of themselves seem to help people sort of simmer down and not get so frustrated. The other thing that seems to help a lot is something we haven't talked about yet called interleaved practice, which is where you are essentially constantly switching between things. So you're not practicing one thing for a big block of time before you move on to something else. You are, constantly switching and interleaving things with each other. The research on that is really clear that when you interleave your practice, that you learn a lot faster and that you retain things a lot better. But it also seems to help with that anxiety and frustration piece. That if you're feeling like really negative about your playing or you're really getting tied up in knots about it, leave it, practice something else, and then come back later. And when you come back later, you're often in a better mindset, you're calmer about it, and you often have a new perspective on what was wrong. Like maybe you have, in the back of your mind, your brain has still continued to work on it, and you've realized some practice technique that didn't occur to you before, or something else that you practiced made you realize, oh, the issue with that passage is this thing, not what I thought. So interleaved practice seems to help that as well. I mean, there's all sorts of like self-talk things that you can do, but those two practice methods, which are effective practice methods, seem to have the added benefit of this psychological response, which is nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you have a great schedule in your book how to like plan your sections, when to do which excerpt. I think it's amazing because most of the students, even if they're practicing for an audition where you have many different excerpts, they usually like get stuck with one excerpt for 1.5 hours.
Right.
And it was me. I mean, I the same. But you also say that this is detrimental to the performance moment.
Exactly.
And why is that?
Yeah, exactly. So a number of reasons. So when you practice one thing for an hour and a half, I mean, I think we've all done that, right? You just stick on one thing for a long period of time. And when you do that, there's a lot of performance skills that you're not working on. So for instance, a skill that I think is so important for us as musicians is the skill of flexibility. I mean, even within a single excerpt, like the music keeps going, you have to switch your frame of mind constantly to be able to remember how to play it. And when you do interleaved practice and you're constantly switching between different excerpts, let's say, you have to work on that skill of flexibility of remembering, okay, now I'm playing Don Juan. Oh, now I'm playing Mendelssohn Scherzo, or whatever. And you have to work on that skill of flexibility. So that is really beneficial. Two is when you stick on one thing for a long period of time, it's really easy to fall into something called the illusion of mastery, which is, I mean, it's exactly what the name says. You have this illusion that you've mastered it, but you haven't. The way the illusion of mastery often shows up for us as musicians is two ways. One, you feel like you did great practice. So you've done this excerpt for an hour and a half. At the end of your practice session, you feel like, okay, yeah, I got this. This sounds really, really great. And then you come back the next day and you feel like all your work has left you and you have to redo your work. Even though the practice session the day before felt great, it wasn't actually. If you lost all your work, you fell into the illusion of mastery. And you're basing your mastery, what you thought you achieved, on how it feels at the end of the practice session. That is very different from what's going to happen in a performance or an audition situation, right? Like, you don't get to get up in front of the committee and practice it for a while, and then at the end be like, hello, now you can listen to me. Now I sound good, right? Like, you just have to get up. Unfortunately, exactly. You just have to get up and play it on the first try, on the only try, right? The way you want. And that's a really, really different skill for your brain. When you do interleaved practice and you're constantly switching between things, you work on that skill of being able to remember how to play it much more instantly than, okay, after an hour and a half, now I can play it. That's not what you're going to do in the audition. So you're working on a different skill than you need.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I would also love to talk about mental practice because it's also a thing for preparing for auditions. Before we dive into it, you said like 5 hours of practicing is more than enough.
Yep.
Can we do more if we do mental practice, or is that also for the brain, it's 5 hours and stop?
It seems like 5 hours of focused work, whether it's physical or mental, is the limit for us. That being said, you can extend your practice time in terms of body wear and tear by mental practice. I mean, this is especially true for especially singers and brass players. They really have to worry about fatigue in a way that, like, me as a string player or a pianist, like, we can typically practice for longer in a day. But mental practice, you're not using your body, right? You're using your brain. And so you can get more time. You can practice for that 5 hours. I think a singer being like, I can't practice for 5 hours a day. Well, you could if you,
Yeah.
I mean, definitely you don't have to, but if you wanted to, you could supplement that, right, with mental practice.
Yeah. And for some students, I often have the impression, also for orchestra players, that mental practice is still kind of a woo-woo thing,
Yeah,
and
right.
maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. No, I won't try it. So can you maybe like walk us through how to approach it and how often or how long we should ideally do mental practice?
Yeah,
All of that.
absolutely. Yeah. So to address that, like, I don't think this is a real thing. I mean, I definitely thought that for a long time. And then there's a study I talk about in the book that made me realize, like, okay, this is a real thing. I need to do this. So I'll just describe that study really quickly. So in the
Yeah.
study, they had a bunch of people who had never played any instrument ever, who had to learn how to play a little scale up and down on the piano. One group practiced it. Another group mental practiced it. And they found that both groups made a lot of progress over the course of this study with learning how to play this little thing on the piano. The thing that blew my mind about it, though, is around the time that study came out, a different study came out that found that the part of the brain that controls the left hand of string players, the hand that we use on the instrument, that part of the brain gets bigger as a result of the practice. So me as a string player, the part of my brain that controls my left hand fingers is bigger than just like people walking around on the street, just like the general population. So based on that research, that the size of different parts of our brain changes based on how we use those body parts. In the mental practice study, they hypothesized that the people that were actually practicing on the piano would show a change in their brains, that the part that was controlling their fingers would get bigger. The question in that study was, would anything happen to the mental practicers? And what they found was that, yes, in the people that practiced physically on the piano, the part of their brain controlling their fingers got bigger by the end of the study. But the mental practicers, the part of their brain controlling their fingers, got bigger to almost the exact same extent as the physical practicers. So they literally changed the physical structure of their brain just by thinking about it, just by mental practice. And so that completely blew my mind when I first read that study. And that to me was like, okay, this is a real thing if it literally changes the structure of your brain in a way that you can measure. So that was the convincing thing to me. So in terms of what mental practice is and how to do it, mental practice is making sure you can hear and feel everything involved in playing. So can you hear pitches, quality of sound, dynamic shaping, like all the sound-based things? Can you hear those in your head the way you want? And then on the other side of things, can you feel all the physical aspects of playing? So for me as a string player, like which finger or fingers are down? What's the spacing between them? Where am I on the fingerboard with my bow? Like what's the bowing? What string am I on? Where am I in the bow? What's the contact point? And then all the physical posture stuff, right? How are you using your body? Anything physically that you need or want to be aware of, you want to make sure you can feel that inside your head. And it's not a passive thing. Like it's an active imagination of, can I conjure up the sound? Can I conjure up the feeling of this? In terms of using it to practice, you can definitely just mental practice. I have mental practiced on airplanes for like countless hours in my life, right? The way that I use it most of the time, actually, though, is in my regular practice sessions, I'm constantly going back and forth between mental practice and physical practice. So I will usually, whatever I've decided to start with, I will usually start by seeing if I can imagine it in my head. Can I hear everything the way I want? Can I feel everything the way I want? And what I'm looking for are, I call them black holes. Are there any black holes? Anything that I can't imagine, that is just totally blank in there, or anything that's fuzzy, or anything that's incorrect, right? Maybe in my mind, I'm like, those are not the right notes. And I'm hearing it wrong. And so then I need to correct it in my mind. Or I realize like, wait, I'm out of tune. Like I can feel that my hand is not in the right place on my instrument. And so I will try to correct that in my mind. And so once it's clear and it's correct in my mind, then I'll do it on the instrument. And obviously you get feedback from the instrument. Sometimes you do it on the instrument. It's like, that feels great. Okay, let's move on to something else. Other times the instrument gives you information. It's like, oh, okay, that's not quite working. And so I put it back in my mind, imagine it again with the new information that I got from the instrument, make that clear, and then put it back on the instrument. And I find that it really, really speeds up learning, and it helps things stick a lot better when I can do it clearly in my mind, that I can feel and hear, yes, that is correct.
Yeah, I imagine that that's a great tool for memorization too. And that's the next topic I wanted to dive
Yes.
into because I'm so curious myself. because, well, I'm going to share an experience I've never shared before, actually. When I did my entrance exam for university, I was 18 years old. And of course, this was also a bit the moment from going from just playing the flute because I love
Mhm.
it to a professional kind of thing. So
Right.
starting my studies. So maybe there was this component too. But I was always a person who was just playing things by heart. I was not
Mhm.
thinking about it
Mhm.
as a child and later as a teenager. And then I came to this exam and I was standing there and I blacked out, but completely. I had no idea where I was. And I had to ask the jury if I could just take my music and
Music.
do it again. And it was so embarrassing. I did the entrance exam for 2 universities and I blacked out 2 times at the exact same place.
Oh no.
So it took me some time to like think about that and overcome it and regain confidence in my
Yeah.
memorization skills. So, from a neuroscience perspective, what was probably happening in this moment, and how could I have avoided that?
Yeah, good question. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Those
Yeah,
experiences are so stressful and upsetting and just they feel baffling, right? Because like you said, like you'd played by heart all the time growing up. It
yeah,
wasn't a big deal. And then you get in front of these people and you can't do it. So often when those things happen, it's because the person, the player, has been relying unconsciously on one type of memory. So I talk in my book about there's many different types of memory, and when we perform music, the types of memory that we need to be relying on are muscle memory. How does it feel to play this piece? Aural memory. What does this piece sound like? And then cognitive memory or declarative memory. Like what are the actual notes and rhythms that are on the page?
mm,
And all of us have one of these that is just stronger than the other. For me, it's muscle memory. For many musicians, it's aural memory. And often when we're growing up as kids, kind of obviously we just rely on the one that's easiest for us because why wouldn't we, right? And we don't really think about it and it just happens and we just, if it's aural memory, like you know how it goes and then you just play it. But then when you get in front of people or you're in a higher pressure situation like an audition, you start to overthink and you start to realize like, wait, what is this? I don't actually know what this is because you've known it in
yeah,
kind of this like subconscious kind of implicit way. And when you start to think about it, you realize I don't actually know what this is. And I mean the brain does weird things when it's under stress and you have to rely on memory. I think we've all had experiences like that where suddenly like you don't even know your own name or something that like seems like it's really obvious. And so the way to prevent things like that from happening to you is to make sure you strengthen these three different types of memory equally so you have something to fall back on, that if the one you're used to using kind of falls apart on you, you have other forms of memory. The other thing that happens when you strengthen these different kinds of memory equally is they reinforce each other. So it's much less likely that those kind of blanks and blackouts will happen in the first place. And so in my book, I talk about a variety of ways to test each one to see how is this type of memory. So for instance, to test your muscle memory, play your piece from memory or play a section from memory without any sound. So for you as a flute player, just finger, but don't blow into the instrument. For
yeah.
me as a string player, the most effective actually is to take your cleaning cloth and slip it under the strings so it mutes them. And then you just get a bunch of squeaks that come out. And then you're not getting any sound feedback from the instrument to tell you, are you playing the right notes or not? And it really tests, does your muscle memory know this in the absence of that sound feedback? To test if your aural memory, if you know how it goes, can you sing it from memory and know what the pitches are supposed to be and know how it's supposed to go without like fingering along silently on your instrument. Just like sit there and like sit on your hands if you have to. It can also be helpful to test like declarative memory. What are the notes and rhythms? To get out a blank piece of staff paper and write out what it is, what the actual notes and rhythms are. My guess is that if you had tried to do that as a teenager, you wouldn't have been able to, right? Usually most people like
No.
can't do that step at all because they don't actually know. And that's why things disappear on you when you're under pressure because you realize, oh my gosh, I don't know what this is. And you in that moment you don't have access to the information that you do know and you can't play it.
Yeah, for me, for sure, it was just muscle memory. My fingers were
Right.
just doing what they were doing. And the minute I started to think about it, I had no idea which note I actually
Was
played.
playing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For me, I have this story that I tell in the book of when I was probably like 10 or 11, I think. I was playing in a little solo recital, like kids recital, playing from memory. And in the middle of the concert, I realized that the piano had the melody that I was just playing. And I never noticed that before. And it was really interesting to me. So I started listening to the piano and I'm still like playing along right now, paying attention to myself, listening to the piano, like, oh, that's so cool. The piano has my melody. And then like the piano, like, stopped with the melody and went back to like an accompanimental figure. And when that happened and I realized, oh, the piano's done with their melody, I was still playing, but I had no idea where I was. And for some reason, I didn't freak out about that. I just listened to myself because I was still going. I just
Yeah.
listened to myself and I was like, oh, that's where I am. And then my brain like came back together with my hands or something. It was such a strange experience that I was playing and I had no like knowledge of what I was playing and I just listened to myself. But it was because I was relying purely on muscle memory. And it's amazing that I didn't black out in that moment and realize like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. Because that would have been a perfect moment for that kind of thing
Yeah.
to happen.
It's like an out of body experience.
Right. Yeah.
It's
It really
interesting.
was like such
Yeah.
a strange experience. But
But after an example like that, it can take months or even years for some to rebuild
exactly.
trust in performing by heart. So, what does science tell us about how confidence forms and how we can strengthen it?
Yeah, great question. So, what I find with working with people, especially if they've had an experience like this, is that testing these different types of memory, like I've talked about, can be really beneficial because it gives people confidence. Oh, I do know this in a variety of different ways. And it helps them find where their weak links are. That, oh, I don't know what that is right there. And so then they can kind of shore that up. Another thing that really helps is actually going back to interleaved practice, like we were talking about, and testing memory in an out of order type of way. So there's lots of ways that you can do this, but one way that I like is, for a specific section you want to test your memory on, practice something completely different, put on a timer, 5-10 minutes. When the timer goes off, stop what you're doing and see if you can play that section from memory that you're practicing. You're playing it from memory totally out of order. It's harder than what it's going to be like in real life.
Yeah.
Or divide your piece into sections, assign each section a number, and then use a random number generator to tell you which section to perform from memory. But don't look at your music to figure out, it says section 5. Okay, what is section 5? And you have to kind of think through. The thinking through and figuring out what is section 5 will help it solidify better in your memory. Being able to play from memory when there are distractions going on can be really helpful. So the most challenging distraction I know of is to put on a recording of the piece you are playing from memory, starting at a different point than the beginning. Have that playing while you are trying to play from the beginning from memory. It's a massive distraction. But if you can do that and play from memory, then that gives you a lot of confidence that like, okay, it's going to be way easier when I'm in the performance. And
Yeah.
then doing practice performances for other people. Start small with someone you really trust, that like, if you have a memory slip, it doesn't matter, and frame it for yourself as, this is an experiment to see where things go wrong, that you don't go in expecting perfection of yourself. You go in trying to see, okay, where do things fall apart on me so that I can go back in the practice room and make sure that those things are stronger. And I think that when people do kind of like graded exposure therapy in that sort of way, that you start off with like little performances, that it doesn't matter if you mess up, and you gradually work up to ones that feel more important, that can help people gain confidence in themselves again.
Yeah. And maybe also using a recording device for that if you don't have an
Exactly.
actual audience. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I
Yeah.
find that for people, especially some students who are really scared of performing from memory, the first step of that might be recording themselves audio only playing something from memory, because often that creates some pressure. And then once an audio only recording situation feels okay, then maybe you're going to video yourself just on your phone, and that creates a little bit more pressure. Can you do that? How do you feel? And then once video recording yourself feels fine, then, go to some person that you trust. And it doesn't even have to be live. Like you could do it like over the internet, right? On FaceTime or
Yeah.
Zoom or something like that.
Yeah. Good. Great step-by-step plan.
Yeah.
And we already talked about it like 2 times now, but I want to get back to that. You write in your book, the more we focus on technical precision during performance, the less clean our playing becomes.
Yes.
So also looking back on that experience, I realized I might have been hyper focused on mechanics in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can we measure where our focus really is and where should it ideally be?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it back to that because that's a really important
Yeah.
point too. So yeah, there's this research that shows that if you are focused on like physical mechanics and like technical precision, especially in a performance situation or a high pressure situation, you're more likely to mess up, which is kind of terrible, right?
Yeah.
And what the research finds is that if instead you are focused on big picture things, so for us as musicians, that would be phrasing and expression and sound and like the experience you want the audience to have and all of these bigger musical ideas. If you're focused on that, it's much more likely that you won't essentially get in your own way and mess yourself up. And it's counterintuitive. It seems like, okay, if I want to play really cleanly, I really need to focus on my mechanics and I really need to make sure that everything's really clean. But actually, by focusing on that, you're going to make it less clean because your body is able to self coordinate and is able to sort of self manage those things. And if you get in the way of that with your conscious brain, you really mess yourself up. So it's not enough to just be like, okay, I can't think about that. Because I think we all know if somebody tells you not to think about something, you're going to be thinking about that thing, right? Brains do a lot better when they are given something else to focus on. Just like little kids, if they're misbehaving, usually it doesn't work very well to say, don't do that. But if you give them something to distract them with, and it's an activity that's like really engaging for them, then they'll do that activity and not whatever it was that you didn't want them to do. So our brains are kind of the same. And so deciding in really specific terms, I think, what do you want to be thinking about? Do you have a really specific musical something that you're trying to express here? Do you have a really, really clear sense of the shaping and the phrasing? If there are physical things that are hard to do, that you do have to have some attention on that, thinking in terms of an analogy for how it feels works a lot better than thinking like, my first finger has to do this, my wrist has to do this. But anything big picture you can think about, but you have to decide ahead of time and you have to practice with that kind of thinking so your brain remembers to do it, that it knows to do that, and that you can trust that it's going to work.
Hmm. And and if we do all of that and still nerves are like hijacking our focus, how can we like get back to it? Sometimes in high pressure situations, students are like, I don't even know where my focus is. How can I redirect it? So what do
Right.
we do
Great
then?
question. Yeah. I mean, I have always really struggled with performance anxiety myself. So this is something that I have a lot of experience with. And I will say for me, when I used to have those experiences of like, I don't even know where my focus is. How can I redirect it? Like, I just feel like all over the place. In hindsight, I had no plan for where I was going to direct my focus. I had just thought in broad terms, I want to be thinking about the music. That's too broad. You have to be much more specific. Something that's in my mind right now is athletes, like gymnasts and figure skaters who perform like a routine, that it's not like, a baseball game or something like that. They talk about having a mental script that goes along with the physical routine they're performing. And the point of the mental script is to keep their brain focused on exactly what they want to be doing at every moment. So the pressure of the Olympics, let's say, doesn't get to them. And it's not that like every step of the way you have this, I'm thinking about this on this note, I'm thinking about this on this note, but that you have thought through, okay, where are the places you're most likely to get really nervous and really worried? And what are you going to think about instead of, oh my gosh, this high note is really, really hard to play? What are you going to think about instead of that that helps you? So it might be that I'm going to think about the trajectory of the phrase, and that high note is like the pinnacle of where I'm going, and I'm really just focusing on bringing across that energy. Or maybe if it's something for string players, we often worry about our shifts, especially if they're big. And it can be really, really helpful to pay attention to your bow instead, to make the bow really, really smooth and make a really smooth connection between the bows. And so, okay, I'm not going to be thinking about my left hand. I'm just going to be thinking about my bow here. And so you decide ahead of time, what are you going to think about? If your brain starts to go away, then you have something specific to bring it back to that you have practiced with, that okay, this is what I'm going to do. The mental script is just as important as the physical script of what you're going to do on the instrument. And then if your focus starts to go sort of elsewhere in an unexpected place that you have decided ahead of time, just before the performance, what are you going to think about if things start going wrong. For me personally, when I feel that sort of panic of your brain is like everywhere and you feel like you're not playing very well, I feel like I'm just like closing down. That's what it feels like to me inside, that I like close down and I'm like, no, I want to get off stage. Like, let's get out of here. And so the image in my head is that I have these like big, almost like barn doors that I'm pushing open. And I'm like, no, 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 we have to stay open. And that image for me is really powerful of like, no, if I stay open, I'll actually play a lot better than if I start closing down. And so that's an image that I know is helpful for me, that I've practiced with in the practice room, that in maybe like a mock performance for my video camera, I have felt myself close down and I've had to practice like opening the doors back up, so that when something like that happens in a performance, I have an immediate go-to and I don't have to like, cast around trying to find something. I think often we don't think about putting in this mental aspect of it and practicing that just as much as practicing how to play it. But in my experience in dealing with my own performance anxiety, that has been the most powerful thing for me. I learned a lot of this from Noah Kageyama, who runs the Bulletproof Musician website and podcast. So if people don't know his work, like go read every single thing on his website. He has such helpful stuff about this. But it wasn't until I encountered Noah's work, this is like many years ago now, that I was like, oh, wait, there's this whole mental aspect to performing. And these are skills and these are things that I need to practice that I wasn't even aware of. In retrospect, it's like, well, obviously there's skill. Obviously there's things you need to practice, but it had never occurred to me. And it was just like something that I wanted to magically have happen for me on stage, that I would have these mental skills. And like, why would that happen if I hadn't practiced it? Right. And so making that as much a part of the practicing and preparation for a concert as like learning my notes has been really, really beneficial for me personally.
Yeah, great. I was just going back in my mind to our first example of the 4 weeks audition preparation. Would it be a good idea also to like decide for every excerpt where your focus goes, so that you really like, also so that excerpts don't sound too similar, to really like change into different focus and mood? Does that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, for every one of my excerpts, I don't take auditions anymore, but for every one of my excerpts, I have a set of like 3 to 5 bullet points at the top of the excerpt to tell me what to focus on. And it might be a musical thing in terms of the character of the excerpt. It might be a physical thing, like I need to keep myself really open and sort of broad for this excerpt so I have the right character. But there are 3 to 5 very succinct bullet points, things that I have discovered in my experimentation and my practicing are helpful for me to play the excerpt the way I want. And in my practicing of the excerpts, and certainly in doing mock auditions, like we were talking about, before I play each excerpt, I quickly read my bullet points and like make sure they're engaged in my brain. And then I go so that it becomes as much a part of playing the excerpt as actually playing the excerpt. And so then in the audition itself, you do that really quick refocus of yourself. You don't have to play instantly, each new excerpt. You have a minute to compose yourself, right? And focus yourself. And if you take that time, and I would say for me, it takes 5 seconds at the most to just, go through that really quick list and internalize that. That's going to make me able to play that excerpt with much more success and much more like the way I want to play it than if I just jump right in without even thinking. So yeah, that's super, super helpful for excerpts, I think.
Okay. Yeah, great. And now we've talked about so many great tools and things we want to change in the practice room, but our brains sometimes are stubborn, right?
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about what it takes to rewire old patterns and changing a deeply ingrained habit like imposture, embouchure, whatever. Because it sometimes can feel almost impossible to change those things.
It does feel almost impossible. I have changed many habits in my life. So again, I know from personal experience how arduous and frustrating and just like, it just takes a long time to change habits. So I think a couple things are important to understand about this. And I think this helps make the process feel a little bit better. Is that when you're making new habits, you are physically changing the structure of your brain again, that your brain neurons have to start communicating in a different way. You're making like literally new neural pathways in your brain. And the old pathway for the old habit is really, really deeply ingrained. It's really automatic. And your old habit just happens automatically without you even thinking about it. And even if you know intellectually, like, this old habit is not serving me, you will fall into that if you aren't paying conscious attention at all times to the new habit. That being said, it's much easier said than done to pay conscious attention to your new habit all the time. And one thing I talk about in my book for changing ingrained habits is something called old way, new way, which is basically a method of like compare and contrast between the old way, the bad habit you're trying to get rid of, and the new way, the new habit. And old way, new way, essentially the way it works is you are doing the old habit on purpose and describing in words out loud in as much detail as you can what that old habit feels like to do, how it makes the sound, and anything you can describe about what the old habit is like. And then you are doing the new habit on purpose and describing out loud in as much detail what it feels like. And you're going back and forth between these two things, describing the old way, describing the new way, many, many times to bring that old habit back into conscious awareness. So that is something that's really effective. The other thing that I tell my students, especially when they're changing an old habit, I think all of us have had the experience of you're trying to change an old habit and you think you're paying attention to it. And then in the middle of a rehearsal, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm doing this old habit. Like, what's wrong with me? Like, I know I'm not supposed to do this. And that is just the way it goes with changing an old habit. It's kind of like that experience of driving home from work and you need to make a detour to pick up something and you just automatically drive home like on autopilot. And you're like, oh, how did I forget to pick this up? It's because it's that unconscious automatic processing. What I tell my students is every time you catch yourself in a bad habit, rather than beating yourself up for that, celebrate that you caught it. Because every time you catch yourself in an unconscious habit, you are bringing it back into conscious awareness and you're giving yourself an opportunity to choose the new habit, which will then strengthen the new habit. So I tell my students, when you catch yourself in the old habit, celebrate that you caught yourself. Don't beat yourself up that you did it. And then make the conscious decision to do your new habit. And that will make it quicker to get through that process of changing. The other thing is just having sort of a realistic timeline in mind. I think people think they can change from an old habit to a new habit in like a week or two. That's not even remotely how it works. It takes much longer than that. I like to think of it like a loading bar on a computer. Like everybody wants it to go from 0% to 100% like instantly, but it's kind of a slow loading bar. And in my experience, depending on how ingrained the habit is, of course, but in my experience, it often takes sometimes up to a full year before someone can do the new habit consistently all the time in the practice room. But often it can take longer than that, up to 2 years before that new habit is consistent in performance. Because I think we all know we revert to bad habits under pressure because our brain reverts to what it knows best. And so that was my experience with changing habits. That's how long it took me to make it so that my new habits always showed up in performance. And when I share that timeline with students, their eyes kind of get big, like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me this long. But I think it also helps them have a realistic perspective on it, that if they've only been changing their habit for a month, like, of course, it's not going to be consistent yet. You're only a month into this 1 or 2 year process. That's fine. You're doing great. Maybe your loading bar is at 15% rather than 100%, but that's better than 0%, right? So celebrate the wins along the way. Celebrate every time you catch yourself in your old habits. Celebrate the little bits of progress you can see. And that's going to be much more effective. And it's going to be a better experience to go through it than this constant beating up on yourself. Why can't I do this? Why can't I do this? Well, your brain takes longer to change.
Your brain takes longer to change. That's a great closing statement for this episode. Oh my gosh. Molly, this was such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much
Thank you.
For making us understand what's really happening in our brains when we practice, when we perform, and sometimes even when we fall apart on stage.
Yes.
It's actually so uplifting, and it's uplifting the quality of musicians' lives because it saves us so much time and nerves.
Right.
Findings.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please, everyone, check out Molly's website for online courses, events, and her amazing newsletter. And for the bonus material, stay tuned because we'll have another short session with additional questions. Thank you so much, Molly, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.